This episode of the Quantum Space Innovating Trust podcast is brought to you in association with Vibu Systems, pioneers in software protection, licensing, and long-term digital trust. Quantum computing is no longer theoretical, and it poses a fundamental challenge to today's cryptography. Methods like RSA and ECC will not survive the quantum era. With its next code meter generation, Vibu Systems is already preparing a smooth, compatible transition to post-quantum ready security across hardware, software, and cloud licensing. Discover how CodeMeter is being engineered for the post-quantum future and why preparing early is the only safe strategy. Visit vibu.com/PQC today.
There's a particular moment inside most organizations when preparedness stops being theoretical and becomes painfully real. It is usually not that dramatic at first. There's no music, no cinematic warnings, no giant flashing screen announcing catastrophe. Often it begins with uncertainty, an alert, a missing system, a strange spike in traffic, a phone call from a supplier, or a journalist asking questions nobody inside the organization is ready to answer. And then the clock starts. For years, the cybersecurity industry has talked about readiness as though it was something measurable through paperwork, certification, policy frameworks, maturity assessments, government structures, and compliance audits. Entire markets have emerged around helping organizations demonstrate that they are prepared. They produce reports, they build dashboards, they complete tabletop exercises, they achieve certification status, they satisfy procurement questionnaires. And yet, when major incidents occur, many of these organizations that appeared prepared on paper still fail operationally under pressure. And that uncomfortable contradiction sits at the center of this episode, because readiness on paper and readiness under pressure are not the same thing. The problem is not that frameworks are useless. Regulations such as NIS2, DORA, the Cyber Resilience Act, and wider operational resilience requirements exist for good reasons. Policies matter, governance matters, reporting structures matters. But modern digital systems are now so interconnected, software-defined, outsourced, and dependent upon invisible trust relationships that operational resilience can no longer be measured purely through documentation. The question is no longer simply, are you compliant? The question increasingly becoming relevant is, what happens when your systems, your suppliers, people communications, evidence chains, and decision-making structures come under genuine stress? And that is a very different test. One of the most dangerous assumptions in modern cybersecurity is that preparation naturally produces resilience. In reality, many organizations optimize for passing assessment rather than surviving disruption. They prepare for the audit. They prepare for procurement review. They prepare for regulatory scrutiny. But they do not always prepare for operational chaos. And chaos changes behavior. Under pressure, decision-making slows down. Teams fragment, communication becomes political, escalation paths fail, legal departments intervene, evidence becomes incomplete, vendors stop responding, dependencies suddenly become visible, and executives demand certainty before certainty even exists. The modern trust stack does not fail cleanly anymore. Identity systems depend on cloud infrastructure. Cloud infrastructure depends on third-party services. Monitoring depends on telemetry pipelines. Telemetry depends on storage and visibility. Authentication depends on certificates, and certificates depend on trust anchors. And software updates depend on signing infrastructure. And AI systems depend on data integrity, and operational continuity depends on all of them functioning together at the same time. Which means resilience is increasingly about coordination under pressure rather than isolated technical capability. The CrowdStrike incident of 2024 exposed this brutally. What made that event so important was not merely the technical fault itself, it was the speed with which operational dependency became visible across the global economy. Airlines, hospitals, financial systems, broadcasters, logistics operators, and critical services experienced disruption, not because they had individually failed to secure their own environments, but because a trusted software update propagated failure simultaneously across thousands of interconnected systems. Many affected organizations were compliant. Many had mature security programs. Even more had extensive government structures. Yet operational paralysis still spread rapidly because modern digital dependency chains operate faster than traditional response structures were designed to handle. The lesson was uncomfortable. Highly centralized trust relations can produce highly centralized failure. And when disruption becomes systemic rather than isolated, resilience is no longer purely about cybersecurity. It becomes about organizational choreography. For instance, who has the authority to act? Who can isolate systems? Who can suspend automation? Who owns supplier communication? Who explains disruption externally? And who understands the dependency chain? Who has visibility into telemetry? And who can make decisions without waiting for committee approval? And these are not theoretical questions. These are operational survival questions. Another example came from MGM Resort attack in 2023. The technical compromise itself attracted headlines, but the deeper lessons were operational fragility. The disruption extended into hotel access systems, into payment systems, booking systems, casino operations, and eventually customer experience. Digital systems that normally appeared seamless suddenly stopped becoming highly visible precisely because they stopped functioning. Again, the issue was not simply whether MGM had cybersecurity policies. The issue was whether the organization could continue operating coherently once trust within the core systems had become uncertain. Modern organizations increasingly rely upon continuous identity validation, automation, integrated platforms, and interconnected operational technology. Once trust in those systems become unstable, disruption expands rapidly beyond the original point of compromise. And this is where the idea of the compliance trap becomes important. Many organizations still imagine resilience as a defensive perimeter problem. They think in terms of prevention, firewalls, detection, compliance, policy, authentication, encryption. But modern resilience increasingly depends on recovery capability, visibility, adaptability, evidence integrity, communication discipline, and operational coordination after the disruption has begun. And that's a very profound shift in mindset. It means the most important systems may not be the systems that stop compromise entirely, but the systems that preserve organizational coherence during uncertainty. Observability becomes critical. Evidence chains become critical, as does telemetry and identity assurance, and decision visibility becomes even more critical. The organization must be able to understand what's happening while these events are unfolding, because without visibility, there's no confidence. Without confidence, there is hesitation. Without hesitation, organizations move quickly. With hesitation, they freeze. And freezing under pressure is often where operational collapse begins. This is one reason why regulations such as DORA place increasingly emphasis not only on security controls but on operational resilience itself. Regulators have recognized that digital disruption is no longer exceptional, it's structural. The question is not whether incidents occur, but whether organizations can absorb and recover from them without systemic failure. That's a very different philosophy from traditional compliance culture. Historically, compliance often rewarded static demonstrations with show the policy, show the process, show the government structure, show the evidence of assessment. But a modern digital environments are dynamic systems and they evolve continuously. Dependencies change continuously. AI-driven activity changes continuously, and threat surface change continuously, and supply chains change continuously. Static assurance struggles inside these dynamic environments. And nowhere is this becoming more visible than around artificial intelligence. Many organizations are currently racing to position themselves as AI ready. They publish governance frameworks and establish ethics principles. They announce internal AI policies and they produce oversight committees. But very few organizations have genuinely stress tested what happens when AI systems become embedded inside operational decision making during a crisis condition. What happens if an AI-assisted fraud system blocks legitimate financial activities at scale? What happens if identity confidence scoring produces false escalation during an incident? Or what happens if automation accelerates containment decisions without adequate human verification? Or what happens when human operators no longer fully understand the systems making these recommendations? And these are operational resilience questions, and they sit directly inside the trust stack. The same pattern now exists around post-quantum cryptography readiness. Many organizations have begun inventory exercises. They've started transition planning. They're producing strategy documents describing migration readiness. And vendors increasingly advertise quantum-ready products, architectures, and trust frameworks. And some of this work is absolutely necessary. But there's also a growing risk that quantum readiness itself becomes another compliance theater exercise rather than a genuinely operational capability. Because cryptographic migration is not simply a technology refresh. It's an infrastructure coordination challenge. Certificates, firmware, devices, hardware security modules, identity systems, embedded infrastructure, long-term signatures, interoperability requirements, software dependencies, and regulatory expectations all intersect simultaneously, which means operational resilience during migration matters just as much as cryptographic strength itself. The organizations that succeed will likely not be the organizations with the most impressive PowerPoint strategy. They will be the organizations capable of coordinating transition under pressure without losing operational coherence. And this brings us towards one of the deeper structural changes occurring across cybersecurity and digital identity and trust infrastructure. For years, the industry focused heavily on prevention. They prevent breach, prevent intrusion, compromise, and prevent fraud. But modern digital environments are increasingly forcing organizations to confront a very different reality, that prevention alone is insufficient. The focus is shifting towards detection, containment, recovery, continuity, evidence, adaptability, and trust preservation during disruption. This is not pessimism, this is operational realism. The complexity of modern digital ecosystems mean vulnerabilities are no longer exceptional anomalies. They are persistent characteristics of highly interconnected environments, which means resilience increasingly depends on agility, not agility as a corporate slogan, agility as an operational capability. Can the organization detect quickly? Can it coordinate quickly? Can it preserve evidence? Can it maintain visibility? Can it communicate coherently? Can it isolate disruption without collapsing operations? And can it recover trust after uncertainty? These questions are now central. And this is precisely why discussions around digital vulnerability management are evolving beyond simplistic breach prevention narratives. This summer at Vibu Systems InnoDays 2026 in Karlsruhe, one of the major roundtable discussions focuses directly on this challenge. Beyond the breach, responding to digital vulnerabilities with agility. Now, that framing matters because it implicitly recognizes that modern resilience is not simply about avoiding failure entirely. It's about reducing exposure, responding effectively, preserving operational integrity, and maintaining trust under pressure. The roundtable brings together voices from industrial cybersecurity, operational technology, regulatory environments, and software protection infrastructure. That combination itself reflects how resilience is changing. Digital vulnerability management is no longer isolated inside a security department. It now intersects with supply chains, industrial systems, governance, software dependency, operational continuity, and regulatory accountability simultaneously. And perhaps most importantly, it intersects with human behavior. Because under pressure, organizations do not merely reveal technical weakness, they reveal cultural weakness. Some organizations escalate rapidly, others delay. Some share information, others conceal. Some preserve evidence carefully, others panic. Some coordinate effectively across departments, where others collapse into fragmentation. The technical environment matters enormously, but organizational behavior during uncertainty may matter even more. One of the recurring lessons from major incidents over the past decade is that communication failure often amplifies technical failure. Different departments hold different information. Legal teams seek caution, while executives seek certainty. Technical teams seek speed, where communication teams seek clarity, and regulators are now seeking accountability. If these groups are not operationally aligned before disruption occurs, crisis conditions expose the fracture lines immediately. And modern regulations increasingly recognize this reality. NIS2, for example, pushes accountability upwards towards management structures rather than treating cybersecurity purely as a technical function. DORA similarly emphasizes operational continuity, testing, supplier oversight, and systemic resilience. The underlying message from regulators is becoming increasingly clear. Organizations are expected not merely to deploy controls, but to demonstrate operational capability. And that distinction matters enormously. Capability under pressure cannot be fully outsourced, it cannot be automated, and it cannot be fully captured through compliance documentation. At some point, resilience becomes behavior. Ask yourself, can the organization think clearly while systems fail? Can it continue operating while uncertainty exists? Can it preserve trust while confidence is incomplete? And these are difficult questions because they force organizations to confront something uncomfortable. Many structures built for efficiency are not automatically designed for resilience. Cloud centralization improves scalability, automation will improve speed, platform integration will improve convenience, and AI will improve optimization, and outsourcing improves cost efficiency. But each of these also increase dependency complexity. And dependency complexity creates hidden fragility. This is one reason why the concept of digital sovereignty has become increasingly important across Europe. Sovereignty is not only about geopolitical independence, it's also about operational control during crisis conditions. For instance, who controls the infrastructure? Who controls the telemetry? Who controls the cryptographic roots of trust, or the update system, or the data visibility? Or who controls incident response dependencies? Now, these are resilience questions as much as political ones, and the same applies to identity infrastructure. As digital identity systems become more deeply integrated into financial systems, into public services, or border systems, or healthcare environments, or enterprise platforms, and AI-driven decision-making systems, the operational consequence of identity disruption becomes far more significant. Identity is no longer simply an access layer, it's increasingly become an operational dependency layer. And dependency layers must remain resilient under stress. That's why the future of digital trust may ultimately depend less on promise of perfect security and more on the ability to maintain operational coherence during failure. It's a very different narrative from the cybersecurity marketing language organizations have heard for years, that there's no such thing as perfected prevention, there's no such thing as total visibility, and there's no such thing as permanent certainty. But there are organizations that respond better under pressure than others, and those organizations usually share several characteristics. They understand their dependencies, they maintain visibility, they rehearse escalation, they reduce decision bottlenecks, they preserve evidence integrity, and they empower technical coordination. Most importantly, they treat resilience as operational practice rather than compliance theater. Most importantly, they understand that trust is not static. Trust is continuously maintained through behavior during uncertainty. And perhaps that's the real lesson emerging across the digital trust landscape right now. The industry spent years treating trust as something established through certification, authentication, policy, or cryptographic assurance alone. But increasingly, trust is becoming operational. Can the system continue functioning? Can the organization remain coherent? Can evidence remain trustworthy? Can decisions remain accountable? And can recovery occur quickly enough to preserve confidence? These are no longer secondary questions. They are becoming central questions, which means the future of digital trust may depend not on whether organizations can avoid all disruption, but on whether they can remain credible once disruption begins. And that's a much harder challenge. And it may ultimately separate the organizations that merely appear prepared from those genuinely capable of resilience.
This episode of the Quantum Space Innovating Trust is supported by Vibu Systems and InnoDays 2026, taking place on the 15th and 16th of July in Karlsruhe, Germany. As software-defined systems become more connected, autonomous, and exposed, organizations are being forced to rethink how they secure software, protect digital assets, and respond to vulnerabilities at scale. InnoDays 2026 brings together industry leaders, cybersecurity specialists, policymakers, and technology innovators to explore the future of software protection, licensing, digital trust, post-quantum readiness, and operational resilience. The event will also feature the roundtable discussion, Beyond the Breach, Responding to Digital Vulnerabilities with Agility, moderated by Steve Atkins, publisher and editor of The Quantum Space. For organizations working across cybersecurity, digital identity, critical infrastructure, software monetization, or post-quantum transition planning, InnoDays 2026 offers a valuable opportunity to hear directly from experts shaping the next generation of trusted systems. InnoDays 2026 takes place on the 15th and 16th of July in Karlsruhe, Germany. Registration and event details are available at vibu.com/inno-days.
This was The Quantum Space, Innovating Trust, produced and edited by Crown Communications.